pressure canning without fear. And that's me. I'm a wife of nearly 40 years of marital tolerance. I have 5 adult boys, and it's because of them that I do all this. And that's not because I love them, it's because it's cheaper than to feed them. And it's better for them, it's more nutritious, all the wonderful things. So I started canning and doing things like that as a part of raising our boys and just, you know, trying to make the best of everything that you can for providing for I had 5 teenage and young adult sons in the house eating at one time, plus friends. So yeah, I learned a lot of shortcuts and how to do things. And the interesting thing is, I hate to cook. I will can all day long, for day after day, so that on Thursday night I can walk up to my pantry, grab, oh, stew. I can put that over noodles. Here's some pickled beets. Oh, my boys hate those, but I love them. I can take some fresh apple cider, whatever. I can walk up to my pantry and just grab dinner and have it ready and on the table in 15 minutes. That's what I love about canning. Okay, today we are going to cover how food preservation actually works, an overview of food preservation methods, and we're going to take a walk through the canning process. The overall goal of preserving food is to reduce or eliminate the mechanisms that will spoil your food. It's a combination of food science, food processing, microbiology, and food chemistry. So some of those processes include microbial activity. That's the yeasts and the molds and the bacteria. Bacteria causes meat to rot if it's left out. Mold grows on food if it gets overripe. We all know about the science experiment in the back of the refrigerator. At least in my refrigerator. There's usually one going on there. So that is one of the causes. And here you can just see how the mold attacks the part of the flesh and starts breaking that down, spoiling the food. The next is enzyme activity. Enzymes are actually special proteins that act as a catalyst to speed up reactions, causing food to lose their texture and to break down. In nature, it does serve a purpose. Enzymes help fruits and vegetables to break down. For example, a tomato, when it is fully ripe, those seeds want to grow a new plant. So if an animal doesn't come along and eat that tomato and scatter its seeds through its scat, then that seed needs a way to be able to break through that tougher outer shell, that skin. So enzymes are what will break that down. It gives the seeds a chance to germinate and grow into a new plant. In food preservation, however, this is what we want to stop. We don't want those qualities to be broken down. The next one is chemical reactions. That's another way we can stop food from spoiling. Think about making kimchi or kombucha or some of these kind of things, fermenting and pickling. Those are ways that we can stop food from spoiling. Another thing that causes food spoilage is mechanical damage. You've all heard the saying, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. When there is damage to an apple, it begins to break down the tissues. They're weakened and they begin to break down. And then that spreads from one apple to the next apple to the next apple. So we want to stop that mechanical damage. Let's see. So to prevent spoilage, the things that we use are heat, which is called thermoprocessing. It destroys microbes and deactivates a lot of the enzymes. Enzymes are those proteins, and when proteins are heated, the structure of the protein changes and they become ineffective. Sealing provides an airtight seal, which keeps oxygen out and pests out. It provides an actual barrier, so a mouse can't come. He can crawl on it all he wants, but he can't get in. Now, ideally, you don't have mice crawling on your cans, but if you did, they can't get in. Pressure or acidity is the next one. Acidity kills bacteria and microbes that can spoil food. Some foods are naturally acidic. For example, a lot of fruits are naturally acidic. Citrus, definitely, we all think of citric acid. Tomatoes have a certain amount of acidity. Some harmful bacteria is associated in the canning process is called Clostridium, see if I can pronounce this right, Clostridium botulinum bacteria. That's what causes what we know as botulism. That's the big one you want to not have. So acidity kills that harmful bacteria. And if properly processed, the food, if it's acidic enough, it will kill that botulism risk. The next thing that we use is pressure, is another form of preserving. A combination of pressure and heat will kill harmful bacteria. Pressure canning is the only recommended method of canning foods that are not acidic. So when I'm making jams and jellies, they often have either enough acid to the fruit that I'm using, or the recipe calls for me to add a little lemon juice, and that will acidify it so that I can safely water bath can it, and I'll get into that explanation in just a minute. It is not true of foods that do not have that acidity. These things have to be pressure canned. It's the only safe way to kill off that botulinum bacteria. Meat, poultry, seafood, and non-acidic veggies are all things that have to be pressure canned. Bacteria in low-acid food is destroyed when they are processed in the correct amount of time and pressure using a pressure canner. And let me just clarify this, not an Instant Pot or any of those electronic wonderful gadgets that you throw everything in and you pressure cook it. That's a pressure cooker, not a pressure canner. It's a huge difference. The next method is reducing water content, and I'm not talking about dehydrating just yet. We're reducing water content by adding salt or sugar, and that sounds kind of counterintuitive. How does that reduce the water content? What I'm talking about is removing the amount of what is called free water in foods. Free water, microbes need free water to survive. Adding sugar or salt ties up those water molecules and makes them no longer free. They already got a buddy. They got the sugar, they got the salt, that's their buddy. So the microbe they won't even let them in. Just keeps them out. So most chemical reactions can't take place without free water available. Reducing the amount of free water by pairing it with sugar and salt means there isn't enough available for chemical reactions to take place and microbes cannot survive. You can also reduce the amount of free water by dehydration. Oftentimes, you'll find that there is a combination of these different methods. For example, think about a country ham. First, it's heavily salted. That's tying up those free water molecules. Then it's smoked, which is a heat process. Then it's hung to dry, further reducing the water. Another example is orange marmalade. It's cooked with a lot of sugar. The sugar binds with the water, so the microbes can't grow. And then it's water bath canned, so you're applying heat as well. So sometimes you may use multiple levels, multiple processes for the same end result. So
Laurie, I have a question. I don't want to jump ahead,
Go ahead.
Like for carrots or green beans or something, those don't have acid.
Right.
So could you water bath can them?
No.
Okay.
They are low acid. Waterbath canning is only for foods that either have a high enough acidic level or you add acidity to it by adding apple cider vinegar, citric acid, lemon juice, some sort of acid.
Okay.
So, but that's a very good question. So let's go on to the next one. So now, here exactly is what I'm talking about. When to use the water bath canning versus pressure canning. High acidity foods only for water bath. Jars are submerged under 2 inches of boiling water. The processing temperature gets to 212 degrees. It does not kill botulism, but the acidity does. It does not require special equipment. Pressure canning is safe for low acid foods. The jars are closed into the pressure canner with no more than 2 inches of water on the bottom. You do not want to submerge your jars when you're pressure canning. Because of the pressure, it's able to heat to 240 degrees, which does kill the botulism. And the one factor is, it does require an actual canner. As I said, not an Instant Pot. So then, drying and dehydrating is another method. Ideally, it uses warm temperatures, dry air, and plenty of circulation. I'm not going to read through every bit of this. It's in your notes. So everything I'm saying is already pretty much in there. But I'll just touch on that you can use sun drying. Last summer, we had a class building a solar dehydrator, which is available at the AgroEcology Center. Contact Charlotte about the ability to be able to use that. Yes. So that's in our lending library, which we are trying to develop, including potentially some canning equipment and things like this, because there is an expense involved. A canner like this is going to cost you around $100. What it saves you in the long run is well worth it. Knowing what's going into your food and knowing how it's preserved, how fresh it is, and it will save you money in the long run, eventually, because you're growing your own food or purchasing local when it's in season. I'll get to a little more of that after a bit. So anyway, our methods of drying and dehydrating include sun drying, actually literally laying out on a cloth or on a screen and drying in the sun, oven drying, or using an actual dehydrator, which is a piece of equipment to buy. They can be fairly inexpensive, all the way up to sky's the limit. Our next method is pickling. Pickling is either fresh pickling or salt pickling. It's used for foods that are not acidic. Think cucumbers turned into pickles. You're adding acidity to that product. Pickling can be water bath canned once it has been through its, had its ingredients added to it. Salt pickling is using a salt brine to, there again, tying those water molecules up with the salt. It's not quite as clear cut. Some foods use just vinegar, some use just salt, and some use both. So herein is where I'm going to advocate find a reputable source for your recipes. Always be sure of what the source is where you're getting your recipes so that you know it's a safe, tried, and true recipe. Pickling is great for cucumbers, green beans, okra, beets, etc. As I mentioned, one of my favorite treats from my childhood is my pickled beets, pickled and Harvard beets. Oh, love them. Great way to preserve all of those nutrients. Next is fermenting. Fermenting is a little different than just pickling. It actually is a chemical process that's happening. It's an ancient process used to create nutrient-rich preserved foods. More than just preserving, fermented foods are good for your gut health and allow your body to get more nutrition out of the foods because it's partially breaking down those nutrients so that they're more absorbable in the gut. So think of, here again, the kombucha, sourdough bread, cheese is a fermenting process, vinegar, yogurt and kefir, cottage cheese. I never thought of cottage cheese as a fermented food. I just didn't put those two together, but it is. It has to go through a chemical changing process. Then we have the good old freezer. Freezing is wonderful. It actually is the best at preserving the nutrients other than fermenting, which makes the nutrients more absorbable. This will retain the shape, color, texture, nutritional value the best. The downside is you don't ever want your electricity to go out. So that is something to consider, storing things in the freezer. It's a great way to preserve food. It's best for short term because in the long term, you have the risk of freezer burn. And then the last one is freeze drying. This is something that's a little out of the reach of the average household because the equipment for freeze drying starts at about $2,000. To get something the size of a large dehydrator, about so big, it's about $2 grand, and it goes up from there. That's the bottom of the scale. However, it is fabulous for preserving. Someday I would love to have a freeze dryer that was available for community use and have a class on it because it's the process itself is really interesting scientifically, how it takes the food down to a very frigid temperature and then applies pressure, forcing all of the water molecules become ice crystals, and then because of the pressure, it vaporizes the water molecules and sucks them out. There is no water in that whatsoever when you're done, and you can rehydrate, and it is amazing how well it rehydrates. And the flavor and the nutrition retention is fabulous. I'm not there yet. I want to get there. So your big questions is how long do you want to keep it, short term or long term? Do you want to store it in mason jars rather than the freezer? Is it acidic enough to be Waterbath canned, or does it have to be pressure canned? So that's the nutshell, that's the history lesson behind the food preservation. And now we're gonna take a second to grab a sip of something to drink, and then we're going to get into the actual canning process. So the tools of the trade. I will tell you right now that there's only 3 things on here, 2 things that you have to have and 1 that you will want to have. You have to have an actual pressure cooker, whatever brand it is, but an actual pressure cooker. You have to have the lifter tongs, the jar lifter, because when you're reaching down in here, you cannot reach in there and grab one of those jars. They're boiling hot and you will hurt yourself. So you have to have one of those. Everything else is pretty much optional, but I would strongly encourage you, your life will be so much happier if you get a wide mouth funnel because it saves so much of the mess as you're filling the jars. It just fit, and this will fit on either size, regular or smallmouth.
So you don't need a canning rack to keep the cans
You
up?
do need, good point, Shirley. Give yourself a star. You do need, in the base of your canner, and it comes with the canner. You don't have to purchase this. You do need to have this, it can be this. I actually have even canned, because I have a couple of canners and I sometimes have more than one going at a time. You can put a towel down. The main thing is you do not want your jars directly sitting on the bottom, because as they rock around, as it bubbles and boils, they're likely going to break. That's why you want the rack. So you put that rack right in the bottom. If you're doing 2 levels, I think I paid $10 for 2 of them. Got an extra set of these. because I can set this down in and have a second layer. You can stack jars on top of each other, but it's just a little bit more secure if you have a layer. So, but those are the things that you really need. You don't have to have this kind of a rack. You don't need the jar wrench. The tongs and the magnetic lifter, I have one of these. It used to be considered that you should, when you can, you put your lids, after you've washed everything up, you put your lids in hot water, and then you use the jar lifter so you're not touching the lid. Whoop, come back here. And use that to place it so you're never touching the bottom. You can still do that if you want, but it's no longer required and even not even encouraged to keep your lids in hot water while you're waiting to finish the canning process. Not sure why they changed the school of thought, but they have. So that's basically the equipment. The main thing is the canner and a lifter for the jars. Then you want to decide quarts versus pints versus quarter pints, whatever. Jam and jelly, of course, you got the jelly jar. The pints, obviously, like if you were canning beef stew like this, and I know you have a little bit larger family, you're gonna want to make stew in quarts. For just my husband and I, this is perfect. I can dump this out over noodles, over rice. I can add tomatoes to it and turn it into a hearty soup. I can add gravy to it and it becomes a hearty stew. So I like to can it in a simple way so that I can use it in a variety of ways. But you also then have the small mouth versus the big mouth. Liquids, small mouth. Chunks, big. It's just simply easier to get in and out. So just decide what works right for you. Grandma's canning jars. I have actually, as you can see, I've gotten quite a collection of Grandma's canning jars. I have my mother's canning jars, my grandmother's canning jars, my husband's mother's canning jars, and probably a few I got at rummage sales. But they're wonderful, but you should use them with caution in a pressure canner, simply because with age, the old glass may have flaws in it. It might be prone for breakage. And as an example right here, you see this has a little chip out of it. You have to be careful to make sure there's no little chips in that rim, because that will prevent it from sealing properly. They're great, however, to do something like this. This makes a lovely gift. It looks nice on the shelf. Instructions to make a 6-bean soup right on the back. And I got a meal ready to go. I grab it in the morning, throw the beans in to soak. I've got my seasoned packet in there. And all I've got to do is let those beans soak all day, cook them at the end of the day, and I've got supper. So that's what Grandma's canning jars are best for. You want to make sure that all your jars are thoroughly washed with hot soapy water. It is no longer considered essential or necessary to sterilize the jars as we once thought, because it's virtually impossible in a home kitchen to truly sterilize something. So the school of thought now is that you want to wash it with hot soapy water, and ideally when you go to fill that jar, it's good if it's even a little bit warm yet. Even if you just run some hot water in it before you start actually filling the jars. The reason for that is once you take this jar and you put it in your canner, which has nearly steaming water in it, you don't want a cold jar hitting warm water, because then you're going to have breakage. So once your jars are cleaned and dry, it doesn't even matter if they're perfectly dry. If it's just, they're clean and they've got a few drips of water still in them, it typically is not going to be an issue unless you're doing something like a dry canning, like that. Now we're gonna walk through ready to eat beef stew. I told you I love to walk to my pantry, grab a jar, and have a meal in 15 minutes. So this is what I did. I cut up all my vegetables here. I've got some steak that I was on sale for a really great price at Zups. So I bought it when it was at an affordable rate. Potatoes, carrots, and onions just diced up, ready to go. And once I had that, then I'm ready to start loading my jars.
So those are not pre-cooked, nothing there is?
In this picture, the meat actually is browned. You do not have to brown the meat. It's not at all required.
Okay.
But if you brown the meat for something like this, it brings out a little more flavor.
Mm.
So that's the reason, and if you can tell, it's only partially browned. It's
Medium
not
rare.
thoroughly, there's pink there, because it's gonna cook all the way through in the canning process. So, okay, you've got your food all diced up and ready to go. Next, it's time to prepare the canner. So before you start loading your jars, whether you're just doing carrots or potatoes or pickles or whatever it is you're gonna can, you put your rack in the bottom, and you're gonna wanna put about 2 inches of water in the bottom of the canner. You don't want the water to come up over the rims of the jars. So put that on the stove and just put it on like a simmer. You just wanna have that water good and warm. It doesn't need to be boiling at this point, not even steaming really. Let's see. Now there are 2 ways you can fill the jar. You can hot pack or you can raw pack. And really the difference, it's largely personal preference. There's not really a reason why you should or shouldn't dry pack versus raw pack, depending on the recipe that you're making. I could have put the beef in this completely and utterly raw and would have been perfectly fine. I chose to brown it. The difference really between hot packing and raw packing is that in hot packing, you're simply stuffing that jar full, trying to pack it in. You don't want to like use a battering ram, but you want to pack it in there really good and snug. And then when you're all done, all your jars are packed, then you're going to pour boiling water over it. With hot packing, you actually cook the vegetables or whatever it is you're doing, partially cook it, 3 to 5 minutes, boil it. It's a flavor preference. Some people think the flavor is a little better one way or the other. Or perhaps they don't want, if you're cooking something that's really hard like a carrot, in my experience, raw packing them, they cook just fine. They aren't hard. They're soft and really good to eat. I don't hot pack very much. I can't think of the last thing I hot packed. Anyway,
It's like double the work.
It's largely choice unless there's a reason in your recipe why it says you want to do it a certain way, then do it that way.
If you were to hot pack like your stew,
Yep.
with that liquid, would it over time would they get mushier? Do they soften, or is it not really? Does that not?
Not really.
Okay.
It's not been my experience because I've got a batch of this that I made 6 months ago or so, and I packed it. I cold packed it, and I did not fill it with water, the boiling water. So it's just the moisture from the vegetables and the meat itself. And you can raw pack meat, chicken, beef, hamburger, pork, whatever. You can pack that in, don't add any water at all, because it will create its own juices as it cooks during the processing.
Oh, okay.
So like I said, you can see this one, the water line is like down here, right around here. And the veg goes all the way up to here. So you've done nothing wrong if that water goes down. because over time the things will absorb a little bit more of the moisture, but they're like in stasis. They're like stuck in suspended animation. So anyway, that's raw packing and hot packing. It's fine. So in this recipe, I made it in pints, so it is a half cup of each, the meat, the potatoes, the carrots, and the onions. Now, you don't have to follow that. You want rutabagas? Put rutabagas in it. You want turnips? Put turnips in it. You want okra? I've never had okra, but some people like okra. You can change out the veg however you want. And here's where we're going to talk about the seasoning. You do not have to add any seasoning whatsoever. In my process, I add a half teaspoon of salt for a pint, a full teaspoon of salt if it's a quart. And that's just because then I can take that recipe in any direction I want when I open that jar. I can add homemade stewed tomatoes. I can add bone broth that I've cooked myself. I can add noodles or whatever I want to turn that meat and veg into. I can take it in any direction I want. If you wanted to have specific seasonings, this is where you can add any seasoning you want. Within reason, the big catch is things like sage or a lot of oregano, strong flavored herbs can turn bitter when processed in the canner. So that's a reason why you might want to just add those seasonings fresh when you actually make the meal. So, not to say you can't add them now. Go ahead.
And just to clarify, you want the salt because you want to kill the bacteria. Or
You
have the
don't
free
need
water.
salt at all.
Not with that one for the.
No, because it's
botulism
pressure.
thing?
It's
Okay.
pressure can. The pressure and the heat is going to kill the botulinum.
Okay, got it.
So that salt is purely just because I like a little salt flavor.
Okay.
All right. So with the next phase of this particular recipe, or for canning vegetables, whatever, you're going to cover it with hot water. Now you've got your pressure cooker on a low light, as they say in the Brits, kind of a medium low, just warming. At the same time, I have an electric kettle. I'm spoiled. I love it. I use it every single day. So I didn't bother to put like a tea kettle on, so I had hot boiling water to pour on the jars. When I got close to that time, I just walked over, turned my kettle on, and by the time I was done packing, my water's all ready. But you want to pack or pour boiling hot water over the veg. And if you get it, see this one up front here, maybe it was a different picture. There was one in one of my pictures where I got a little too much water in. It was above that 1 inch line. See, when you're filling, you don't want to go above this. Here, take this. Sure, that one's going to stick. There. This lowest line is approximately 1 inch. Makes it really easy to eyeball. And you don't want to fill it more than that. But I had one jar that I poured too much water in. No big deal. Siphon a little out. Use a spoon. Just take a little out. You get a little too much veg in it, pull a piece or two out. It's not rocket science.
So ideally, would you fill your veggies all the way to that line, and then the water just fills between?
Fills in.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
There's one more clarifying question.
Yes.
So I thought that you didn't need to put water in there.
You don't have to. This
Okay.
recipe calls for
Okay.
it.
Cool, just checking.
Yes.
Okay.
When you're doing, as I said, I did a batch about 6 months ago. I did not add any water to it.
Okay.
The water line is actually about down here from the juices that were formed.
Okay.
It's perfectly fine. Maybe after a year, the texture of the parts that were out of the water might not be quite as nice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I
Okay.
haven't had it last that long. But very easy to make adjustments. This is more important if you're doing just meats or something that's a little more solid. you want to run something around that jar and make sure any large air bubbles are brought up, because you don't want air pockets in there. It just doesn't help the canning process. So I don't have a fancy bubble popper. I use a chopstick. And the next step here, anytime you're using meat, fat is the enemy of sealing. It doesn't mean you can't have any fat, because if this hadn't gotten shaken up, you could see the fat at the top. This is my bone broth, or my bone stock. But fat can get on the rim and it's slippery. The seal might not grab. So anytime you're using meat in a recipe, it's a good idea to take a little bit of white vinegar and a washcloth, and you just wipe right around that rim and make sure there's no fat or no food particles on that. You don't want anything to inhibit that seal from adhering to the rim. So then you place your jars. Now, I don't always do this. This is what I was in my research, but what they showed is placing the jar very carefully and then putting your finger on the jar to hold it in place before twisting that rim on. I've never done that. I don't know.
That's like
You do
for a better seal.
Well, you're like, I'll pass this one around. You can see as you feel around the edge, it's really close to the edge on this side and it's kind of overlapping on this side. So if that got too far off center, it wouldn't seal right. I don't think it's something to panic about, but just something to be aware of. So that's putting on the rings. Now it's time to actually take these jars, and they're probably not hot at this time, but just for ease of handling, you're gonna just set that right down in there. And you can do quarts and pints in the same batch. Just keep in mind that the length of time you process, the length of time you have your cooker at pressure has to be what is good for the longest need in the pressure cooker. So if I was doing this stew in a pint, 75 minutes at pressure is sufficient. If I'm doing it in quarts, it has to be in there for 90 minutes. So if I'm putting pints and quarts in here, I'm gonna do it for 90 minutes. It's more than necessary for the pint, but then I can do everything in one batch, if I were doing that. So you can see I loaded one, and you can see there's just a little bit of water down in the bottom of the cooker there. You can't even really see it in there.
How much water do you put in the bottom again, did you say?
Only about 2 inches, it's in your notes there.
Okay, I missed that one.
Yeah, it's about 2 inches, 2 to 3 inches. You just don't want it covering over the tops of these jars. And if you do the second layer, it's convenient, it's not necessary. You can stack one on top of another. If you do stack one on top of another, it's good to try and offset them, because anything that's gonna jiggle and potentially affect that seal. So if you can offset them, great. If not, you know, it was pretty cheap investment. I'm very happy with it. Okay, so then we've got our stewing. Now, in different pressure cookers, there's like 4 brands that are really common in the United States. Presto is one of the most common. It's probably about the most affordable one out there. If money were no object and I had 5 boys at home at this point, aside from being nuts, I would invest in a brand called the All-American. It has levers that flip up and screw tight, and it uses a weighted gauge. So the Presto uses what's called a regulator, and I'll explain that in just a moment. So, but on the Presto here, first of all, I want to just point out, this is your steam vent. So steam is going to come out of there. This right here that pops up, that is your locking vent. So when pressure is up and that's out, you cannot take this lid off. It will not open. It's literally locked closed. And it will not open until that's all the way back down flat. And this little button here, for those who are afraid they're gonna blow themselves up in their kitchen, if the pressure gets too high, your regulator is on, and you're cooking away, and you fell asleep on the couch watching your soap opera. Yeesh, can't imagine. Anyway, this, it's not gonna shoot off, it's just gonna go bloop. And then this little button, if it still is building pressure, that little button's gonna pop off, and then you're just gonna be releasing steam into the air. It's not gonna blow up. Any canner that's less than 50 years old is made with these kind of safety features. So they're very, very, very safe. So on the Presto here, good old faithful, there is an arrow, you probably can't see it from here, but there's an arrow right here that lines up with an arrow, if you can see on that bottom handle, there's an arrow there. It literally cannot go on wrong. It only will fit. I mean, you can't even, it won't, even if you turn it 180 degrees, it won't fit. It has to go on with that arrow lining up. And then this one simply twists closed, and that's it. That's how you seal the pressure cooker. As I said, the All-Americans have levers that flip up and you screw down. There might be some differences in the pressure cooker you end up getting, but just follow the manufacturer's instructions. They're so safe now.
What would you say is the advantage to the other style, or like why would you say
The main advantage to the other style comes down to this right there. This is the pressure gauge, and something I literally just learned this in doing my research. The pressure gauge on here tells you how many pounds of pressure are contained inside the unit. This is why you can't use an Instant Pot, because there's no gauge that tells you what the pressure is inside. You have no idea if it's up to pressure or not. So this gauge, through this research, I found out really should be tested once a year for accuracy. I've had this for years and I've never had it tested. I never even heard of such a thing. So I'm really curious. I'm going to take this to my extension office down in Lake County, or I'll call them first and make sure they even do it, but get that tested, because now I'm really curious. So that is the potential inaccuracy. If this for some reason didn't work right, or it didn't read correctly, and I could be thinking I'm canning at 11 pounds per square inch, but it's only at 9 pounds, I'm not going to get hot enough to kill off that botulinum. So, as I said, I've used this literally for a couple of decades. Doesn't mean I'm not going to get it checked now. Knowledge is power. So that is the big thing. And this is the other part. On other styles of, this is called the regulator. I'll explain when and how to use it in a minute, but that pops on there, and that is what stops steam from escaping and builds the pressure on the inside and causes this dial to read the pressure. You can get one of these. This is a little gauge. Put that on there. Each one of these, this is 5 pounds of pressure. Put one of these on, 10 pounds of pressure, 15 pounds of pressure. With these, now I have not tested this on mine yet. This is all new to me. But with these, this is gonna do a hula hoop. It's just gonna dance around. It's not gonna rattle, it's not gonna fly off, but when it gets to the point that it's just doing a hula dance like that, then it's at pressure for the number of weights that you have on. And at our altitude, one weight on it. And this was like $10. You can get them on Amazon. and convert your regulator to a weighted gauge. So do some research on that and decide which you want. You can convert a regulated canner to a weighted gauge. I guess that's my point, is that you can do it that way. If you are using the weighted gauge on here, don't count on this. This is not going to read accurately, because it reads different because it's a different kind of weight on it. So then the only thing this is for, if you're using a weighted gauge, is to tell that it's completely back down to 0. But as I said, I'm going to get that tested now. I'm really curious, but I have used it for decades, literally. So we have our lid on and lined up. I've explained about the weighted gauge. So now, once your canner is, all your jars are in here, you're going to turn up the heat to about a medium high. Don't crank it all the way to 10 just to get it there faster. And the reason I say that is that as it comes up to temperature, if you have it cranked all the way to high, it's going to come up to temperature and zoom right past the pressure that you want it to be at. And then you got to bring it back down. And you have to wait till it settles. Well, if you turn it down too far, then you're doing this. If you bring it up slowly and make small adjustments, you won't have that wild scale going on. So you're going to bring this up to temperature on a medium high, and you'll start to see spit and sputters and steam coming out of this little vent pipe. When it gets going, not spitting and sputtering, but when it's full-blown steam engine sending up a chimney, you're going to let that continue to steam for 10 full minutes. And what that's doing is it's starting to build pressure on the inside. It's reducing the amount of atmospheric oxygen that's in there and starting to build the pressure. After it has been steaming, and I tried to take a picture of steam. It doesn't show up on the camera, let me tell you. So after it gets up to where it's steaming, you cannot see that there's steam shooting out of that, but there was. You just set this regulator or your weighted gauge, if that's what you're using, on here, and then the pressure starts to build. We're still not starting our timer for our processing. When this gets up here in our area to 11 pounds of pressure, and when it's stable at that, then you start your timing. In the case of my stew here, 75 minutes from the time it is stable at 11 pounds of pressure. If it goes a little above, that's fine. You don't have to do anything different other than make a slight adjustment. But if it drops at any point below 11 pounds of pressure, you have to start your time all over again. If you're half an hour into it or halfway into it and you walk away and you don't realize it and you get back and you check and it's dipped down below pressure, you have to bring it all the way back up to pressure and start that timer over, because otherwise you're not guaranteeing to kill off that botulinum. So when it is pressurized, during the pressurizing, that's when you see that little knob that I showed you, that pops up and it locks this. You physically cannot open this once that's up. And as I mentioned, the overpressure button, if you walked away from it on high, that's gonna pop off and it's just gonna blow out steam. So it's not dangerous, but you do need to pay attention to it. All right, your 75 minutes of pressure canning is all done and you've turned it off. You have to wait till the pressure comes all the way down to 0. You do not remove the regulator or weight, whichever you're using. You just have to wait. It's going to take a half an hour to 45 minutes for the pressure to drop in the canner. And when it gets close, that's when that pop-up button is gonna drop down. When it's almost at 0. Once it hits 0, still let it sit there for another 5 minutes to equalize the pressure between the canner and the outside air. When it's been at 0 for 5 to 10 minutes, you can take that off, remove the lid, and always, common sense is not always available. Turn it away from you, because that's going to be very hot and steamy, so you want to lift it away from you. And that's when, as I took my layers out, I used a meat fork to grab that middle layer in there, because I just don't want to touch anything in there. It's so hot. And this is an hour after it came out of the canner. It's still boiling. It is that hot. Once you take it out of the canner, you're gonna set it on a towel on your counter, and you wanna keep a couple fingers between them so there's plenty of airflow. And then you're gonna leave them to sit there for 16 to 24 hours. Just plan on them staying there till tomorrow. Because it will take that long for them to come completely back down to room temperature. And then the next, this is the moment of ultimate and pure satisfaction. I love that sound.
It's amazing you caught it.
Yeah, it took a while. I probably had a half an hour of video to get that.
Worth it.
Totally worth it. I could play it over and over again.
I have a question.
Yes.
Seems silly, but if they're properly canned, can they freeze thaw, or is that problematic?
Any food that freeze thaw, you're going to be breaking down the textures.
Yeah.
You really should store your jars, ideally where it never gets to freezing,
yeah.
Never gets above 120, and preferably where it's dark or dim. As I said, light can actually affect the nutritional value in the food. So if you have pantry shelves that are open to the room, hang a curtain over them. The less light that gets to them, the more they retain their color, the more, and it actually can break down nutrients. Light does break down nutrients in the food. So the best thing is to store them. They should not freeze. They should not get above 120. And they should ideally be kept where it's dim at least or dark. Basements are great. Unfortunately, I don't have one. You're going to want to take a warm soapy washcloth, wipe off the outside. Sometimes in the process of creating that vacuum seal, the pressure causes these contents to expand and the water and the moisture inside to bubble up, and it can slip out of the, that's why when you put these on, you do get them lined up first, thank you. Only just lightly finger tight. You never want to crank on them because you want anything that needs to escape. And then as it cools, then it contracts and it sucks down that lid and makes the vacuum seal. And but that means sometimes there's a little schmutz on the outside of your jar. So you always want to wipe things off and have it clean before you put it in the pantry. If you're inspecting your jars, and let's say this one, oh, that isn't sealed. I hear that pop. This is perfectly safe to eat. I'm going to put it in the fridge and I'm going to use it first. So that, just because something didn't seal, maybe a little fat was on the rim or something and the seal didn't take. It's still absolutely perfectly good to eat. Get it in the fridge in 24 hours and then use it first.
And if you find one on your shelf that's popped, I assume it's
I would probably, for myself, if I found it on the shelf and it was popped, it would depend on what it is. Meat, no, throw. Don't trust. Meat's scary. If it's a jar of my jam, I'll open it up, I'll check it out for myself. I would never sell it to anybody else, but I would probably put it in the fridge and use it. If it's a jar of carrots, I might, do the sniff test, or if there's anytime you'd see any kind of bacteria damage, mold, anything like that, obviously, just get rid of it. It's not worth it to risk. But if you follow the procedures, follow the steps, these things are shelf stable. Let's see, I canned the pickled jalapenos in 2021, and they're still good because I've recently opened some. The longer food is kept on a shelf, nutrients do break down. It will lose some of that nutritional value. It doesn't mean it's not safe to eat. As long as that seal is intact, there are some recommendations, like meat, I think, is only recommended to put on a shelf for 1 year. So if you get a sale on roast and you dice up a bunch of stew meat and you can all that stew meat, so I can just go grab it and dump it into a dish and I'm ready to go. Next time that meat's on sale and I can up some more, I'm gonna make sure that's at the back of the shelf and I move the older stuff to the front. So you're constantly cycling through and keeping the most nutritional value to that food that you can. And I think that is it. Any other questions? Yeah.
We're using jars, but what about reusing like lids?
Good question. Rings, yes. Jars, yes. Lids, no. You always want to start with a new lid. So when you open the jar, you'll see that this red here, it's indented, it's impressed with the imprint of the rim. So, yeah, any other questions?
It's kind of a comment, but I'm kind of excited to do like a bone broth or a stock. Anything to say about that?
From my homegrown chicken meat from this last year, we had our Poultry to the People project, where for the first time ever I raised meat birds, and some of you were part of that program. And we had a big butchering party at my house, and oh my gosh, that was fun. If you can have fun doing a rotten job, oh, it was fun. Food, friends, music, it was a great day. It was a great day. Anyway, so this was made from, I cooked a whole bird in my Instant Pot, because it's a cooker, not a canner. But I cooked the whole bird. After we ate, I put the entire carcass in, took as much meat off as I could, put the entire carcass in, added, I've been collecting the bits of celery that you don't use, the paper off the onions, the carrot peelings, things like that. I throw them in, I've got a reusable silicone bag that I just fill with that stuff and throw it in the freezer until the next time I cook a chicken. And then I take all that and put it in with the carcass, and I pressure cook it for an hour. And once that comes down, then I will jar it, and then I pressure can it after that.
You pressure, you mean you cook it in an Instant Pot?
I cooked the carcass down in an Instant Pot, and with all of the onion papers, the scraps, all of that.
with water too.
Just with water to cover it, cooked it on high pressure for an hour, let it come down to depressurized, strained off all. What I usually do is then I put it in the fridge overnight because it's too hot to work with right away. And then the next day I'll take all the bits of meat and everything, strain the broth off, and the broth goes into a jar. It was nice and clear, but it's really shaken up right now. But the broth goes into the jars. All the meat is set aside for some hot dish or whatever I'm gonna make, and can this up and making mashed potatoes, use chicken broth. Making cooking pasta, you can cook it in chicken broth. Such good.
Wild rice.
Wild rice cooked in. Oh, this last week I mentioned I got a little touch of food poisoning. I ate something didn't agree with me, and I was just sick for a few hours, but really had an upset stomach. I just opened one of these, heated it up, chicken soup.
Yeah.
Basically, added a little salt because there's no seasoning in it, but it's just all that flavor and so healthy, like full of collagen, full of all the good things. Thanks for coming, guys.
Yeah.